Let's talk about pubs. Well, so many people desperate to get back to the pub, not just to buy a pint or get a gin and tonic, but just to socialise with people, to feel a bit normal, take that sodding mask off. And also the tiny small point, that millions of jobs in this country rely on our hospitality to be open in order to work, to pay tax, to feed their families, and fund that NHS everyone's so proud of. And yet, yesterday, in a sort of casual aside almost at the liaison committee appearance the Prime Minister made, he talked about pubs having effectively vaccine passports and how they would be allowed to do that. Maybe up to the landlords, he said. Let's talk about this with Kate Nicholls. He's Chief Executive of UKHospitality. Good morning to you, Kate.
Good morning, Julia.
Only a month ago, the Prime Minister was very clear, no, we would not be requiring people to have, vaccine passports. That wasn't what the government was looking at. They're not saying the government's going to bring this in, but he's certainly left it wide open the possibility that the government would not prevent this happening. So we should have to present papers, our personal medical records, in order to go and buy a pint. Is that something the hospitality industry would welcome?
No, I don't think we think it's necessary or proportionate for going to the pub or popping to the coffee shop or going down to a restaurant for a quick bite to eat or a lunch. We can understand why the government is looking at COVID status certification, which is what they're calling it, for reopening global travel. It's being looked at across the world. And it's possible that may have a role to play in reopening those very large events that we've struggled to reopen so far, mass sporting events, large concerts. We can see why it might be appropriate there. But I think going down to socialise with family and friends, where it's normally a walk-in experience, don't think it's necessary or appropriate or proportionate for people to have to show a vaccine status or a COVID status to access hospitality. And I think it would put lots of businesses in a very difficult position to be asking for papers. So while the Prime Minister said it might be available to us, we don't think many would avail themselves of that opportunity and actually use it in practice.
Well, and indeed, we know there's some polling, because there's always some polling overnight, saying that 56% of people would support this, 17% against. Obviously, lots undecided. It was a new idea. But the reality is the people who say they would support this are probably the people who have no intention of going near a pub at any point in the next year, don't frequent them often, not really missing them, and think they're unsafe anyway. The people who actually are desperate to get back to the pub, they're the sort of people who, well, they're largely younger. They're people who kind of perhaps understand the concept of taking a level of risk and probability and the like, and want to get back to normal life. What though, if there was, as was suggested by a guest earlier, the idea that actually you could have, two pubs side by side, one where there was a COVID passport, but they were allowed to limit social distancing, no masks, walking to the loo, one-way systems and all of that nonsense. Life was normal inside that pub. You had to show a passport to get in. And the pub next door where you can just walk in, fine, but you're led to your table. It's a table service, not bar service. You're wearing a mask to get up and not allowed to talk to anyone at another table. I mean, I'm wondering, in that scenario, an awful lot of people who, like me, who'd say I would never show my passport to get into a pub, might think I'd be very tempted to go to the fun one.
I think there's a lot of people who would look at that. I think what we would urge is that we try and reduce the restrictions on all of our pubs to avoid having to have two different split types of hospitality venue. I think that would be very confusing for the consumer. And ultimately what we're saying is our pubs, bars, restaurants, hospitality venues are safe. We can keep you safe. So I don't think there's an issue there. I do have a concern about vaccine passports, COVID status certification being used when you've got a large proportion of the population that's not vaccinated, that doesn't necessarily have access to lateral flow tests in their workplace. We are talking about potentially introducing this at a stage where a lot of our young people won't be vaccinated. They make up 60% of our workforce and a large proportion of our customer base. So I think it has to remain voluntary. And I think, as I say, I can see a role for it in the way that you're describing for those very large mass events where social distancing isn't possible at all. Reopening our theatres, our major concert venues, our mass sporting events, going back to Cheltenham Gold Cup, for example, but not necessarily where you're popping in for
I'm not sure I'd endorse if that. The whole point of the passport, if of the passport of the vaccine is, if you're concerned for your health and for the wider population, you get the vaccine, but you don't necessarily have the right to control whether other people get it. We don't have them mandatory vaccines in this country. Well, not yet. They're going to bring them in for care home workers and the NHS. But I think one could see an argument for that in a way one couldn't for other people. But you're talking about a bizarre scenario where pubs would be open. and could possibly have vaccine passports for the customers, and yet young people not being able to get those vaccines yet, young people serving behind the bar unable to get the vaccine, but only being allowed to serve perhaps older people, largely, by the way, also more likely to be white people and richer people because the take-up of the vaccine is much higher among those groups of people, and at the same time not be vaccinated themselves. I mean, it's laughable, really, isn't it?
Well, I think it highlights the fact that it's not practical and it's not workable, and it needs to be carefully thought through before we introduce this. I understand the government's review is looking at a mix, like you've got in Israel, of vaccination, negative tests to show that you're not infectious, and those lateral flow tests that we're seeing in the community and in the workplace. But they're not fully there yet to be able to have confidence and certainty that you're not going to be acting in a discriminatory way if you push ahead with this too rapidly. So we would urge caution. It needs a careful thinking through. It needs time to be adopted if it's going to be adopted. And as I say, I think there's a clear differentiation between those circumstances where a negative test or a vaccination is critical for accessing those services, reopening international travel and tourism, going on cruises, large-scale events with no social distancing, and a smaller-scale social event that we know can reopen in a pub or a restaurant that reopened safely and successfully before we had vaccination. So we don't think that it's necessary or proportionate to have it in accessing high street hospitality. And if it's introduced, it must remain voluntary and it must be totally at the discretion of the individual business about adopting.
Yeah, I would say totally at the discretion of the individual customer, and I don't want to bring it in for any of those scenarios whatsoever personally, but really appreciate you joining us as always. Kate Nicholls, Chief Executive of UKHospitality, representing that entire industry. Front page of most of the newspapers after some casual comments. It's always some casual comment, isn't it, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson makes at a committee hearing. Well, let's talk about whether or not you should have to show your personal records of whether you've had a vaccine or not for COVID before you go and buy a pint. With Hugh Osmond, he's founder of Punch Taverns and joins us. Good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
Good morning. Very well indeed. Well, we're told that, pub landlords may well want to do this because, allow you to get back to normal, encourage you to get customers in because customers will know they're safe. So why wouldn't they want to ask their customers to show their vaccine passports before they get in? Is that what you're planning to do in your pubs?
Definitely not. I mean, I think it's the most appalling idea, especially at this stage. I mean, apart from the fact that that it would be incredibly discriminatory against, the young people who haven't even been offered the vaccine yet. How would that work? The young people have been the most badly affected by lockdowns. Their education, university, their jobs all affected. Now you're going to say they haven't even been offered the vaccine yet, and yet somehow the very young people that like to go out and like to go to pubs would effectively be banned because they haven't got a passport. I mean, that's just, it's almost certainly illegal and, appallingly discriminatory. So we certainly wouldn't be agreeing to do it.
You think that actually there would be a legal challenge and it wouldn't be possible?
Well, I don't, it is, if young people have not been offered the chance to get a vaccine and you are then saying they cannot go out to a pub or a restaurant without a vaccination, that is surely unlawful discrimination, isn't it? I mean, just point of fact. I can't see it interpreted any other way.
And this would also, there would be a huge extra cost and having to hire staff on the doors. I have to say, one of the things that's been a right old pain when we did have pubs open, restaurants open, was the whole standing at the door. And I've gone to a pub, there's a whole queue of people standing outside waiting to be led to their table, one-way systems, all of that. That's kind of not what pubs are about. Pubs are places you don't have to go and book in advance. You just walk in, you have meet up with friends, local community. The whole, what people want is to get back to the old normal in pubs, don't they? I mean, is there an argument that actually the very people who say they'd support this measure are exactly the sort of people that won't be going to pubs anyway?
I totally agree. I mean, pubs are not meant to be policemen. It has been really complicated and caused quite a lot of friction, or even though we've done it, to do all the track and trace and take everybody's details, but the industry responded and installed QR codes and so on. This vaccine thing is just the latest, where they're basically asking for pubs to have and restaurants to have to put on extra staff and be policemen. And what about people who genuinely have health issues that mean they can't be vaccinated? Are they permanently banned from pubs, or how does the pub verify that they are exempt? and again, is it discriminatory just against those groups? I mean, I don't get it in the sense that all the vulnerable groups, all the most vulnerable groups have now been offered the vaccine. So all of those vulnerable people who want to take the vaccine can have taken it. These are the people we are worried about. If somebody's chosen not to take the vaccine, even though they're in a vulnerable group, then it's entirely their choice now. Why we would be having vaccine passports when the vulnerable have been vaccinated, the people who are not vulnerable are the people more likely to be going out. Why this idea would come now is a total mystery for me. And I think if pubs, those pubs that elect to do it, if they were to do it voluntarily, well, good luck to them, because we'll be welcoming people with and without passports. And I think pretty rapidly,
I would happily go along with my little card saying that I've had the vaccine and go along and say, hi, just so you know, I've got a vaccine passport, but I'm not going to come in your pub on principle, and I'm going to go to the one next door. And I think we can vote with our feet, can we not? Hugh Osmond, founder of Punch Taverns, thank you very much. Actually, Benjamin Butterworth, I want to bring you in here. He's a late editor at the newspaper. Adam Brooks, who's a publican in Essex, has tweeted, if you're still scared to go to pubs after vaccination, don't go. But don't expect everyone to have to change their lives for you. That's where I am on this. It's just sort of, if you don't feel safe, don't do it. But why? Because this is the whole policy. Once we've realised who's at risk, who's not at risk of lockdown and all the restrictions, has always been about making people feel safe. We've got a way for people to be safe now from vaccination. If people don't feel safe after they have made themselves as safe as they can be from vaccination, is it the job of everyone else to keep reassuring them?
I mean, making people feel safe will hopefully increase the number of people who are going to the pub or more likely a restaurant for a dinner if they feel safe and they feel it's okay to do. And so I do think that there needs to be an effort to shift attitudes as we leave lockdown, because the polling shows consistently that actually the vast majority of people in this country don't take your view, Julia.
I know.
They're actually really quite authoritarian.
Oh, God,
really
they're terrifying.
And quite happy with lockdown. And so I think there was a genuine problem of dragging a lot of those people out and back into the shops and back into restaurants and pubs.
There actually is. I tell you what, though, when those people get the bill for all of this, when they see the lot, they're going to be absolutely furious. When I criticise the government, I've actually said this to some very senior people in the government, I'm doing you a favour. I am absolutely doing you a favour in trying to get you out of this, because in a few years' time, when everyone realises what a horrible, terrible mistake has been made, they will be blaming the government because they did know better. But yeah, I'm absolutely perplexed at the idea that we should constantly be trying to reassure people who've been frightened out of their lives. If the government wants to reassure people, why don't they just stop doing all those ridiculous, scary ads telling them that everyone they meet at the bus stop is going to kill them? It's absolutely ridiculous.